It all started with something so small, so ordinary, that at first I almost brushed it aside. A late-night email notification, a half-hidden boarding pass poking out of his work bag, and a text he sent to someone saved only by initials. He had been talking about a business trip for weeks, mentioning deadlines, client dinners, and late meetings, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. You know that gut feeling? The one that gnaws at you even when your mind tries to make excuses? That's exactly what I had. I started watching more closely. His phone, always face down. His shirts, suddenly pressed and smelling like cologne he hadn't worn in years. And then came the moment that pulled me under, a casual glance at our shared travel rewards account, and there it was, staring back at me. A flight booked not for one, but for two. 2 names, 2 seats, 1 destination. And the second name wasn't mine. My heart pounded like I had been caught doing something wrong, even though he was the one keeping secrets. I refreshed the page 3 times, hoping it was a mistake, but the confirmation number stayed the same. It felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen, hearing the echo of his voice telling me about all the extra hours he had to put in. Suddenly, those long nights made sense. The quick showers before bed, the way he avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. All the puzzle pieces were there, scattered in plain sight, and finally they connected. The shock quickly turned into a fire in my chest. I wasn't going to be the quiet, forgiving wife who sat at home while he jetted off with someone else. I wanted him to know that I knew, but I didn't want to scream or send angry texts. I wanted to show up in a way he would never forget. So I dug deeper. I looked up the exact flight number, the date, the time. My hands shook as I typed in the details, searching for another seat on that same plane. And then, almost as if fate was handing me the opportunity, I saw it. 1 last ticket left in economy. It felt like the universe was daring me to take it. I sat there with my finger hovering over the book now button, torn between humiliation and revenge, between wanting to cry and wanting to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The thought of sitting just rows away from him while he thought he was in the clear was almost too much to process. I could imagine the look on his face when he saw me, the shock that would wash over him when his little secret unraveled right in front of his own eyes. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I pressed the button. The ticket was mine. The plan was in motion, and there was no going back. The decision was made, and from that moment, every second became a mixture of nerves and adrenaline. Booking the same destination wasn't just about catching him in the act. It was about reclaiming my own power in a situation where he thought I was blind. I packed my bag with deliberate calmness, folding each outfit as though this trip were mine alone, as though I was going on vacation by choice and not by betrayal. Inside me, a storm raged, but outside, I wore composure like armor. I even practiced my smile in the mirror, the one that would look casual enough to disarm him, but sharp enough to let him know he wasn't fooling me anymore. The airport felt different that day. Every step I took through the terminal echoed with purpose. I kept scanning the crowd, half expecting to see him with her before we even boarded. But I didn't. That made my heart race even faster. Because I knew they were already inside somewhere. Probably laughing, probably holding hands, believing their little secret was safe. The boarding pass in my hand became more than a piece of paper. It was proof that I wasn't just a passive spectator in his lies. I was stepping directly into the center of his story, on my own terms. When the boarding call began, I waited strategically, letting the groups shuffle in before me. I didn't want to pass him in line. I wanted the reveal to happen where there was no escape, where every eye would be able to witness the moment he realized his perfect plan had a crack in it. I walked down the jet bridge slowly, each step deliberate, like I was rehearsing for a play where I already knew the ending. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I refused to let it show. I smiled politely at the flight attendants, as if I were just another passenger eager for a getaway, hiding the secret war I was about to wage once those cabin doors closed. Finding my seat was like planting a flag. I sat down, fastened the belt, and exhaled, steadying myself for what I knew would happen soon. Every time someone walked past me, my eyes flicked up, searching, waiting, bracing for that first glimpse of him. And then I saw him, at a distance, strolling down the aisle with that casual confidence he always carried, a woman beside him. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I angled my head slightly, making sure he wouldn't notice me immediately. Timing mattered. I wanted him to settle into his false sense of security before the world collapsed around him. The moment their seats came into view and the realization that we were on the same flight would eventually dawn on him, I felt a strange satisfaction. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was clarity, a quiet power that came from knowing I had flipped the script. I wasn't just chasing after his lies, I was walking straight into them, ready to unravel the performance he thought he had perfected. You said key. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, almost electric, as if it knew what was about to unfold. I sat still, pretending to be absorbed in the safety card tucked in the seat pocket, but my eyes flicked upward every few seconds. The hum of passengers stowing bags, the shuffle of feet, the flight attendant's polite greetings, it all blurred into background noise. My attention was fixed on the aisle, on the slow approach of the man I had once trusted with my life. And then it happened. I caught the first real sight of him, and time seemed to slow down. He was right there, a few rows ahead, smiling in that way he used to smile at me. Only now it was directed at her. She was younger, her laughter light and practiced, the kind that floats into a room and demands to be noticed. Her hand brushed against his arm casually, like they'd done this 1,000 times before, like their closeness wasn't stolen, but natural. My stomach tightened, but I forced my face into a mask, as if I were just another anonymous traveler who happened to be watching. He leaned closer to her, whispered something that made her giggle, and for a moment, I could see them as they must have seen themselves, two lovers on an adventure, untouched by consequence. The sight of them together was sharper than any words he could have confessed to me. It was no longer suspicion, no longer guesswork. It was the undeniable truth walking down the aisle in front of me. The betrayal wasn't an idea anymore. It was flesh and bone, standing inches away, bold enough to sit on the same plane as the life he had built with me. I studied every detail, the way he carried her bag so casually, the way she rested her head against his shoulder for a split second, the way they fit into each other's space without hesitation. And all I could think about was how I had once occupied that same space, how I had once been the one he looked at with that same warmth. But instead of breaking me, that vision fueled something inside me. I felt my anger harden into resolve. It wasn't about sadness anymore. It wasn't about being the victim. Seeing them together gave me a strange clarity, a reminder that his lies weren't clever, they weren't even hidden well. They were sloppy, brazen, arrogant enough to parade right past me as though I wouldn't notice, as though I didn't matter. That realization didn't crush me. It lifted me. I shifted slightly in my seat, careful not to attract his attention too soon. Let him bask in his fantasy for a few more minutes. Let him believe he was untouchable, that the world he'd built on deception was solid. Because soon enough, his eyes would scan the rows, and they would land on mine. And in that instant, every carefully constructed lie would collapse, leaving only the wreckage of what he thought he could keep hidden forever. As they moved closer to their seats, I noticed something I hadn't expected, another familiar face. Just ahead of them, seated near the window, was his boss. The man he had spoken about countless times, the one whose approval he chased like it was oxygen. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. What were the chances that of all flights, of all days, his superior would end up right here, caught in the same story without even realizing it yet? My heart began to race in a different way. This wasn't just me versus him anymore. This was an audience, an unexpected witness who could tilt the balance of everything. The irony was almost too much to handle. Here was my husband, confidently boarding a plane with his mistress, believing he had pulled off the perfect escape, and just a few seats away sat the very man whose respect he needed most. I could already imagine the look on his face when the realization hit, when the lines of his double life collided so violently in the tight space of that cabin. I leaned back into my seat, steadying my breathing, knowing that timing had just handed me an ally I hadn't even asked for. His boss, unaware of the storm about to break, was scrolling through his phone, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. Every now and then he adjusted his tie, the picture of composure. He had no idea what kind of performance was about to unfold in front of him, and yet part of me couldn't stop picturing the chain reaction. How would he react when he realized that the man he trusted with deadlines, presentations, and client negotiations was the same man sneaking around behind his wife's back, flaunting lies so openly that they could be caught mid-flight? I watched as my husband stowed his bag overhead, completely oblivious. His boss glanced up briefly, gave a polite nod, and returned to his screen. The two worlds hadn't collided yet, but they were on the verge, and I sat there like the keeper of a secret about to detonate. The beauty of it was in the stillness, the anticipation. Neither of them knew I was there. Neither of them could sense the trap closing in. And for once, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like I was holding the script while they stumbled through a play they didn't know I was directing. Every detail sharpened in my mind. The tightening of my husband's jaw when he finally caught sight of me. The inevitable glance his boss would cast from him to me. The unspoken questions that would hang in the air thicker than the recycled cabin oxygen. The setting couldn't have been more perfect. Trapped in a narrow aisle, thousands of feet above the ground, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And all I had to do was wait for their eyes to meet mine. The seatbelt sign blinked on, the flight attendants finished their checks, and the cabin settled into that quiet hum before takeoff. I sat perfectly still, my pulse steady now, every muscle ready for what I knew had to happen. He hadn't seen me yet, and that was part of the thrill. I wanted him to believe, just for a moment longer, that his little secret was safe, that the woman by his side was invisible to the rest of the world. I wanted him to bask in that illusion before I tore it apart. And then, when the moment finally arrived, it was almost cinematic. His eyes drifted casually across the rows, and they landed on me. The change in his expression was instant and unmistakable. His smile froze mid-curve, his shoulders stiffened, and the color drained from his face. I didn't have to say a word. The silence between us spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. The woman beside him noticed, too. She followed his line of sight, her playful smile faltering as her gaze landed on me. For a split second, the three of us were locked in a triangle of realization. The air so thick with tension, it felt like everyone around us could sense it, even if they didn't understand. And then came the shift. His boss, curious about the sudden stiffness, glanced from his seat and looked directly at me. I gave him the smallest nod, calm and deliberate, as if to say, yes, I belong here, and yes, I know everything. His eyes flicked back to my husband, narrowing just enough to signal suspicion. It was subtle, but it was enough. My husband's carefully constructed facade began to crumble right there in that narrow aisle, his authority shrinking with every second under the weight of those two pairs of eyes, mine and his boss's. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the armrest, letting a small, almost polite smile cross my lips. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I simply greeted him, my words calm but loaded with meaning. The woman beside him froze, her cheeks burning, clearly caught in a reality she hadn't planned for. He stammered something in return, his voice low, trembling just enough to betray the panic rising in him. The boss tilted his head, watching, absorbing, connecting dots without needing a full explanation. The confrontation wasn't loud or chaotic. It was precise, sharp, the kind of cut that wounds deeper than a scream ever could. Every movement, every word was calculated. I didn't need to expose him with anger. His own face did that for me. The flight had barely begun, and already his world was unraveling at 30,000 feet. He was trapped, with nowhere to escape, his lies dissolving in front of both the woman he had deceived and the man whose respect he had spent years trying to earn. The confrontation wasn't just between husband and wife anymore. It had become a public reckoning. The rest of the flight unfolded like a slow-motion unraveling, each minute stretching longer than the last. After that first shocking confrontation, silence filled the space where laughter and whispers had been. He avoided my eyes, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his shoulders hunched as if he could fold himself small enough to disappear. The woman beside him sat rigid, her arms crossed tightly, her gaze darting anywhere but toward me. And then there was his boss, composed but watchful, stealing glances between us, piecing together the story without needing me to spell out a single detail. The tension pressed down on the cabin, invisible yet suffocating, a storm cloud no one could ignore. Every interaction became loaded. When the flight attendants came by offering drinks, my husband's hand shook as he reached for his cup, spilling a few drops onto the tray table. The woman beside him muttered something under her breath, her lips tight, her expression no longer amused but impatient, as though she had been promised a glamorous escape and found herself trapped in a disaster instead. His boss accepted his drink with a polite nod, then returned to observing in silence, the kind of silence that spoke louder than judgment, louder than reprimand. It was the silence of someone collecting evidence, weighing character, already reevaluating trust. For me, the hours in that confined space were a strange blend of empowerment and ache. The betrayal still stung, but watching him unravel in real time dulled the pain with something else: clarity. I no longer needed excuses or explanations. His actions told the whole story, and the fallout was unfolding right in front of me. I didn't lash out. I didn't cry. I sat with quiet strength, every so often catching his eye just long enough to remind him that I was there, that the truth was no longer his to hide. The woman eventually pulled out her phone. Scrolling endlessly, refusing to look up, her body angled slightly away from him. The space between them grew colder, heavier, until even strangers passing by on their way to the restroom could feel it. He tried to lean toward her once, murmuring something meant to soothe, but she didn't respond. Instead, she pressed herself against the armrest, as far away from him as the narrow row allowed. Whatever fantasy he had built was crumbling, not just because of me, but because the very person he had chosen was recoiling from the chaos he had dragged her into, and all the while, his boss kept watching. There were no words exchanged, no accusations hurled across the aisle, but the damage was irreparable. By the time the plane began its descent, my husband's career, his affair, his carefully polished image, all of it had been tainted in the quietest yet most devastating way. The flight ended, but the consequences were only beginning to take shape, and for once, I didn't feel like the one left behind in the wreckage.